we are going to be talking about kits and multi-packs. We're going to talk about what's in your box, Blue Streak Standard, what is in the box. And then we're going to talk about some selling strategies. We're going to talk about selling strategies for both the outside salespeople as well as the parts professionals behind the counter, fielding those phone calls and taking on those customers that are coming in through the doors every day that have a lot of questions and really need your guidance. So that's what we're going to be talking about, and how we can recommend kits and multi-packs as solutions rather than just a part. And we're also going to talk about some of the testing and validation that we do and have done so that you have confidence when you're recommending not just a multi-pack or a kit, but any number of components from Standard and Blue Streak. And then at the end, I'm going to pass it off to my pal Aaron Schaefer here, and he's going to talk about some sales support that's really going to be beneficial to you after you learn these things, and things that you can use to help your customers make those, knowledgeable buying decisions. So, what is in your box? Well, here's what's in ours. Here's what's in those Standard and Blue Streak boxes that you can confidently say to your customer and let them know goes into the part that's in that box. Lots of research and development. We have 15 fully equipped research development centers around the world with amazing engineers doing a lot of ground up and up to the ground work, meaning we do engineering, reverse engineering, and we're always trying to find a way to enhance the part, make it work better, make it last longer, and stay within those OE parameters so that the PCM on the vehicle recognizes the part and it works like it should. And after that research and development, you got precision manufacturing. Now, we are a basic manufacturer, meaning we go from the ground up, meaning we source the raw materials all the way to the finished product. The precision manufacturing is done in 21 different manufacturing facilities all across the country and the world. And then we also do testing and performance analysis. So it's one thing to do research and development and make sure it's a precision manufactured part, but we still have to test it and make sure that the performance is up to par with what it should be. So a lot of detailed part type specific in-house lab testing, not only for performance, but also durability. And we're going to talk about performance a little bit here in a minute. And then we even do on-vehicle validation. I'm here in Irving, Texas at our training center where our vehicle test facility also is. And that vehicle test facility, we actually take most of the components we're going to be talking about today, and we put them on real vehicles, real high mileage vehicles, not brand new cars. And we do testing anywhere between 500 and 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 miles under different conditions, different temperatures, to make sure not only does it work in a lab when it's tested, but it works on the car when it's going down the road. And we follow that up with a lot of sales support, training programs, videos, marketing support, and category management assistance. So when the question comes into is what's in your box, that's what's in ours. It's a lot. And the reality is there's really not any competition out there that can hold a candle to what we put into every part and every box that is on your shelf. So if we want to talk about selling the right part, and we're talking specifically now on the outside salespeople in that role, there's a lot of things that the Standard and Blue Streak kits and multi-packs do to help technicians save time and do the job right. So how do we want to convey that message to the technicians, to the shop owners? Well, one, we want to bring awareness, right? We want to make sure they know about all of the kits and multi-packs on your shelves. And sometimes that can be hard to do because there's a lot available. We're going to go through the most common ones here in a little bit, but we just need to bring awareness. Oftentimes, when it comes to full kits and multi-packs, if a technician knows it exists, they're going to opt for that as often as they can. And then, once they know we have them, we want to explain the benefits of installing a kit or a multi-pack. Maybe it's somebody who hasn't really messed with them that much, doesn't understand the benefit. Well, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the fact that they have to chase less parts. In some cases, it just means they don't have to wait 24 to 72 hours for a dealership to order a very small bolt that comes with something, or maybe it's a gasket, something like that. The less time they spend chasing parts, the quicker they can turn that bay. It's going to save that installation time, and it's going to include all those related parts that may have caused the failure in the first place as well. So there's a lot of benefits when we're talking to technicians about kits and multi-packs. And then we're going to explain the benefits of selling. So for your service riders, for your shop owners, the ones dealing with the car and the vehicle owner at the counter, it's so much easier for them to explain a one-line item on a ticket that encompasses everything that's needed to do the job right with one price. rather than 5 or 6 or 7 line items all broken out by different pricing. It's hard for customers or owners of vehicles to understand that when they're not in this business. It makes them feel like, are they really, do they need that? Is that necessary? Well, in these cases, it is. So a one line item makes it a lot easier for that service writer or shop owner to make the sale. But even more important than that, it restores the vehicle's performance and increases that customer satisfaction. And what I mean by that is there are a lot of parts on a car that, when replaced, will turn off a check engine light and correct an immediate concern. But it doesn't mean that it's going to restore the vehicle's performance. And I'll show you an example of that here in just a minute. So one of the biggest benefits to a kit or a multi-pack is getting that performance back to the vehicle and to the customer that drives that vehicle so that they know the money they spent was well spent. And it also reduces comebacks. So for our outside sales professionals, that's why kits and multi-packs are so important. We've got a lot of great talking points for our shops and technicians. And the same thing holds true on the parts professional side. Again, you folks that are fielding those phone calls, taking on those customers that come in, it's the same thing. It helps technicians save time and do the job right, but it also helps DIY customers save time and do the job right. So, how do we want to approach this with the customers? Well, before we tell the customer or offer the customer a part, let's review all of the choices you have in inventory before you make the recommendation. Say they're coming in for part A, and you look it up and you notice that there's just an individual part A, but there's also a kit where it includes other things. We want to review and make sure if we have that kit, we're looking at that first. And if we have that kit or a multi-pack available, second step is easy. Be prepared to recommend it first over the individual component, because where you see a kit or a multi-pack, there is a need. It's something that's been identified as either a common failure, a problem child part, an OE failure that needs a solution, those kind of things. So if you see a kit or a multi-pack, we always want to recommend it first over just the individual component. But before we do that, let's explain the benefit of using that kit or multi-pack before you recommend it. Always mention that price last, because once we explain the benefit of why we suggest the multi-pack, it's going to make it a lot easier for them to understand the minimal cost difference in some cases, or the higher cost difference in other cases, as opposed to just getting the individual component. And when we talk about kits and multi-packs, again, they are definitely increasing more and more as the weeks and months and years go by. But to really, hone down and respect your time here, we want to really focus in on about 6 categories. There's a little additional 7th in there that I'll touch on. But really, when it comes to kits and multi-packs, where we're seeing the biggest buy-in from technicians and even DIY customers are on fuel injectors, oil filter housing kits, turbocharger kits, cam sensor kits, ignition coil kits, and also VVT service kits. And so that's the ones we are going to primarily spend our time on here today. And so we're going to start with fuel injectors. Now, when you think about a fuel injector, generally speaking, you don't have to replace them all that often. But when they do fail, it's usually because of age, high mileage, or in some cases, fuel contamination, which is very unfortunate, but it does happen. And with a case of fuel contamination, we're going to have to replace all of them anyway. So a multi-pack is a great option for that customer. But what if it's just age or it's just high mileage? Well, in a case like that, what we want to do is we want to fix the customer's concern, but we want to have the car or the truck, whatever it is, perform the way it's supposed to, like it did new. And it's really hard to do that when you only replace one injector. And the reason I say that is this: as mileage increases, as time goes on, soot buildup happens. You can have deposits build up on the nozzle of the injector. Poor fuel can damage them. A lot of things can happen to the nozzles of these injectors, and does happen. It's not if, it's when it happens. And the higher the mileage is when that happens. And so let's say we have a customer come in with 6 injectors. I say 6 because that's what we have an example of here on the right. They have 6 injectors, and we've identified cylinder number 1 is not functioning properly. We have a drivability issue and we have a check engine light on. Well, obviously, if we replace cylinder number 1 fuel injector, that's going to take care of that light. That immediate drivability issue is going to go away, and our customer should be happy. But there's a lot more we can do, and we can go further. And here's what I mean when I said in the beginning, restoring performance. So if we look at the top, you'll see we have 2 injectors circled in red, But I first want you to look at the two in the middle. Look at that spray pattern. It's basically it's robust. It is full. It's got a mist. It's exactly what it's supposed to be. Then we look at the injectors on the right circled in red, and they're really just a weak stream coming out of the nozzles. And so what does that mean? Well, the injector's working. We can see that. There's something coming out of it, but is it working the way it's supposed to? And the answer is no. And so if we only replace one or two injectors, and those injectors are working at peak performance, but we have 4 or 5 additional injectors that have 130,000 miles on them, they're probably not going to be controlled and getting the spray pattern the way it's supposed to be because they're not capable of doing that because of their age and because of any deposits or buildup that might be around the nozzle. So when we do that, yes, we're going to turn the light off. Yes, we're going to get the drivability issue taken care of, but we're not going to help that customer restore their performance or get their fuel economy back either. And so that's why if you see on the bottom, when we have a full set of new injectors, we get a consistent spray pattern, which means all cylinders are going to be firing properly the way they're supposed to. Even in the top example, the injector is getting the command from the PCM. It's doing what it's supposed to, just not very effectively. So by replacing all injectors, you're actually restoring the original performance of the car along with the fuel economy. And when you're doing it with one of our kits or even an individual one, you're getting that precise performance, that precision manufacturing, that durability, and that optimized sealing that the customer is expecting. So when it goes back to what's in your box, that's what we have in our box. And if you have a kit and multi-pack, what else is included in that box is the restoration of that performance and fuel economy. And the same thing holds true with a standard oil filter housing kit. Now, it seems weird to call this a kit because it looks like just one part and a couple of seals, right? Well, it is the way we package it because we made it a kit. We made it a full assembly for the customer. And we did that because these fail so frequently. They're so well known for failing. And at one point, they failed so frequently that there was a national back order on these for up to 2 years, 2.5 almost. We'd go for a month or two where you could find them, and then it was another 6 months before anybody had one. And unfortunately, in that time, a lot of questionable solutions came out for technicians to where they had to make a choice. They could either do the job right with the right part that they couldn't get, or they could just do the job and deal with it later when they knew it was going to come back. And one of the reasons they knew it was going to come back is because there was a flaw in the housing design. So even if they went with one of the questionable, solutions, the flaw was still there. And now it has used parts on it because in those solutions, you had to buy just the housing and then you had to basically disassemble the old one, take the oil cooler off, take the sensors off, the bolts, everything, and reattach them to the new housing. So you kind of had a half new, half used part in the vehicle that you knew was going to fail, but it's all they had. That's the only solution they had. Well, thankfully, a couple of years ago, we actually came up with the correct solution with multiple design improvements to prevent the most common issue, which is leaking. And we took care of the customer by completely assembling this. So all they have to do is drop it in. Now, on some of these 3.6 liter Pentastars, it's only maybe an hour and a half to do the job. Some of them are, 4 to 6 hours to get in here and do this. The last thing a technician wants to do is disassemble and reassemble components and just put used parts back on. So by doing it the way we've done it, we've fixed the oil leak flaws, and we've also completely assembled it for the customer with the sensors, with the cooler, with all the gaskets. And those gaskets are also upgraded as well as the housing to deal with the higher temperatures that cause the originals to fail in the first place. And then one last little benefit here to this, it's going to include the correct year, make, model oil filter. With a lot of those questionable solutions that were out, it was universal filters. So if you sold one of those housings and that customer put it on, and then their customer came back for an oil change, now we're going to start playing the cross-reference game on oil filters, which we all know is never fun. So let's make it easier. Let's just give them the right filter the first time, and that's what this kit does. And it also comes with those plenum gaskets for the intake whenever you put it all back together. So this is a kit. It's a very, very great solution for any technician that works on Chrysler, Dodge, or Jeep. One thing I will mention though on these, make sure you sell the right one. Get application specific information from the customer, because while they all basically look the same, very similar, there are differences. There are different oil pressure sensors on certain ones, different oil temperature sensors on others. One even has a different oil filter flow rate versus the other five. So we want to make sure we get the correct application on this, because unfortunately there are some shops that dealt with those back orders for so long that if they're told the one they need is not in stock, you can get it the next day, they'll just call back and order one for one that is in stock. And we're going to have a problem there. So make sure we get application specific to make sure that customer doesn't have a comeback and isn't, upset that the part's not working. And then moving on from there, we have turbocharger kits as well. Now, there's a lot of benefits to these, and I can tell you firsthand, working here at the training center and in the test facility, we've put, I can't even, I don't know if I can count as high as the amount of turbos that we've installed here and tested. And the reason we do that is we have to know what's required to do these turbo installs, because generally speaking, if a turbocharger fails, it's often caused by either carbon buildup, debris in the system, or low oil levels or clogged oil lines. Now, the low oil levels or clogged oil lines, there's not much you can do about that, because we all know what causes that, and that is poor lack of maintenance. Nothing we can do there other than take care of the customer with a solution, which we have. But when it comes to debris in the system, most times, most common in the top right-hand picture that you see there, that's just a turbine wheel that's been eaten completely up. And that was from a filter medium that was sucked through the intake. Remember, these are designed with certain pressures in mind. So the air filter is designed to accommodate that pressure. If a cheaper medium filter is put into the air box, or the wrong filter is put into the air box, it's very easy to pull that medium through the intake and destroy the turbo. But most times it's going to be debris or low oil levels, or it could just be extremely high mileage. And so we have these kits available for gas, diesel, import, and domestic applications. And what I really want to focus on is on the right-hand side, down at the bottom. You see there's a turbo there. There's an oil feed line, multiple studs, multiple bolts, multiple O-rings, different clamps, gaskets, and seals. Now, why would we put all of that in the box? Well, it's because we have tested that turbo here multiple times to determine what is needed. And what we found is, to do this job right the first time and it not have a comeback, you need everything in that image to get it done. So that's what's going to come in the box, so that that technician doesn't break a stud and then have to call the dealer and find out it's 2 days to get a stud in, or a clamp, or a gasket, or an oil feed line. We don't want them to have to go through that. So rather than have them use the dealer for all of it, we'll just give it all to them in one box to make sure they have everything they need. And to give you an example of how many opportunities we have in turbocharger kits, that particular part number alone covers Sonics, Cruises, Tracks, and Encores from 2011 up to 2022. That's several million vehicles in operation on the road today, and that's just one turbocharger kit part number. Again, when technicians know these are available, they're going to call for them because they want to just get the job done, turn the bay, but they don't want to sacrifice the quality just to get it done faster. This, they get quality. It's all new components, even the turbo, no core charge. It's just ready to rock. And so that's one heck of a solution for a technician that does a lot of work on turbos. Now, I said I had another solution in here that was a kit that really wasn't on that first screen, and this is it. And this is just a quick one that we have a lot of, which is electrical connectors for the blower motors. Now, when a blower motor goes bad, it usually creates an excessive amount of heat, which can absolutely melt the pigtail connectors. But even if it doesn't melt the pigtail connector, it could cause damage to the insulation of the wiring harness, and you may not see that, right? So if you've ever done anything where you had to pull the dash out of a vehicle, you know it's the last thing you ever want to do again. And if you had to pull the dash to do a blower motor, say the actual blower motor itself and the resistor, or just the resistor, it makes a lot of sense to go ahead and put a new pigtail on. So for part numbers that we've identified as common issues where the pigtail melts, you're going to find also a blower motor resistor kit, not just the blower motor resistor, but that kit's going to come with a new high temp connector that will withstand excessive heats. And again, it's available for popular import and domestic vehicles. So this just nice little nugget there to take out there and talk about, because right now we're in that time of year where it's getting colder everywhere. Apparently next week, the whole country's going to freeze. So we might need some blower motor resistors out there. Now, the next one is Blue Streak cam and crank sensor kits. And, on older vehicles, especially Nissans and Infinitis, they fail. And often the electrical connectors have been subjected to a very harsh environment and they fail as well. And they fail in pairs, it seems like. Whether it's at the exact same time or 22 days apart from each other, you change one, another one tends to fail, or the PCM can't recognize it anymore. And there's a very easy explanation for that and a reason why. And that is that magnets lose their magnetism over time, right? So you got to keep in mind there's well over 30,000 parts on every car made today. Every single car on the road has about 30,000 components on it. So when a manufacturer is determining what they're going to use as far as materials go, they want to be as cost effective as possible. So they're not going out there and finding just the world's most rare precious magnets. No, they're using magnets that work, and they lose that magnetism over time. Well, remember, the magnetism of these cam and crank sensors are what communicate to the PCM the relative location of both the cam and the crankshaft. So if we only replace one and the car has 100,000 miles on it, well, that one's going to have a nice, strong magnet. It's going to communicate with the PCM very quickly and very efficiently. Whereas now the other may not be communicating quite as quickly or as efficiently, and the PCM may have an issue knowing what's going on. And it's a lot of times the reason somebody will come back in and say, hey, I bought this crank sensor, but turns out it was the cam sensor. Then they come back a week later, I did the crank first, now I did the cam, and now it's saying it's the crank again. Well, it's because the communication is breaking down, and it's because of that magnetism. So that's why we recommend replacing both cam and crank at the same time, along with the pigtail that goes to it, so that we can ensure once that job is done, that communication with the PCM is fully handled. And again, these are engineered for accuracy, speed, and durability. So you're getting the right part in the box, but you're not just that, you're getting both correct parts and the solution with the pigtail to ensure that everything is going to be correct when the job is done. And again, optimizing that engine performance, bringing that performance back. Remember, the cam and crank sensor are very tied and heavily tied to the accurate and proper timing of the vehicle. We'll talk about more of that here in a minute, but timing is important. And if the PCM can't recognize, timing gets messed up. So very good solution on cam and crank sensor kits. And we talk about that the same way with GDI high pressure fuel pump kits. So many vehicles have these high pressure fuel pumps on them now. And a lot of these have what's called a cam follower. It's actually rolling against the camshaft of the vehicle and plunging onto that GDI high pressure fuel pump. And oftentimes, when we have an issue with a pump, it comes in with a P0087 code, which is telling the technician we've got low pressure in the GDI system. The problem is the technician really can't determine the cause, whether it's a failed cam follower or the pump itself. So it's a matter of disassembly at this point. We have to disassemble to see. And at that point, there's really no sense in putting a used cam follower back in along with a brand new pump, especially if we don't know if it's visible. Maybe there's a visible issue. Maybe the cam follower is completely chewed up, in which case we need to stop everything we're doing. And now we're probably going to need a camshaft too. We got some way worse internal damage going on than just a fuel pump. But if there's nothing visible saying this is what's wrong with it, well, let's replace the whole job. That way we know we're going to get the correct fuel pressure after the fact, but we're also not going to have a comeback because it turned out it was the follower, but we replaced the pump, or it turns out it was the pump and we only replaced the follower. So on these, again, coverage for popular import and domestic vehicles, and it includes everything you need. You see the bolts there and the gaskets and the follower. In some kits, it actually comes with the new fuel lines as well, because some of those fuel lines are one-time use. And so we don't want them going back to the dealer for one piece when they could get it all from us in one box. So GDI high pressure fuel pump kits are a great solution for customers working on all these new GDI vehicles on the road. And then obviously we can't talk about kits and multi-packs unless we bring up ignition coils. And ignition coils, we sell more of these every day in the auto parts stores than probably anything else. And the reality is, when one ignition coil fails, it has to be fixed right away. It's an immediate repair, right? But here's the sad part. We talked about performance on the fuel injectors. Well, ignition coils can lose spark energy over time, meaning it reduces their performance. So it's the same story as fuel injectors. If we have six cylinders and we have one ignition coil go bad and we only replace one, and this thing has 110, 130,000 miles on it, well, the reality is we know the other five ignition coils, yeah, they're working. They're not setting a check engine light, but they definitely don't have the spark energy or the discharge duration that a new one's going to have. So essentially, you're going to have one cylinder just hitting perfect. It's beautiful. And you're going to have five other cylinders just trying to keep up with that one. So is the argument you always have to do all ignition coils? No. The argument is if it's a high mileage vehicle and they want to restore their performance, replacing one is not going to do that. Replacing one will fix a check engine light and a drivability issue. Replacing all six goes back to that fuel economy and performance of the fuel injector. We're going to get that performance and economy back because we're going to have six cylinders firing equally, which is the way it should be. And we talked in the beginning here about doing a lot of testing and validation. Ignition coils is one of those where there's a lot of even extra further steps that are taken. So we actually test things like spark energy. You can see there the before durability test and after durability test. We really didn't see much change in the Blue Streak, the FD503K8 kit, right? But I want you to look at the bottom left-hand corner where we got all these little line items of what we're doing. Just look at those last two. The test conditions for doing these durability tests to ensure that the spark energy stays within the parameters it should be was at over 120 degrees Celsius for over 300 hours. Now, I can tell you that's a long time in a car. It doesn't sound like it. That's a long time in a car. So we are validating these long before they ever make it to your box and to your shelf with pretty substantial durability testing so that we know for sure it's going to meet or exceed the OE. And in most cases, we're definitely exceeding. We'll always meet, but in a lot of cases, we'll do our best to exceed. And here's a perfect example of that. We're testing the spark energy, ours against a low quality and against an OE. And as you can see on spark energy, we're just absolutely way above board when it comes to longevity and ability versus our competition. And it's the same thing with discharge duration, right? So why does that matter? Why do we want more spark energy and more discharge duration? Well, it's simple. An ignition coil that doesn't have to work as hard is going to last longer, right? The less work it has to put in, the less tired it gets. And so when we put in coils with less capabilities that have to work at their maximum all the time, right? It's going to fail. It's just going to fail. So if we can give better spark energy, make the coil work a little less harder, it's going to last longer. And it also gives us additional capabilities when there are additional capabilities within the coil to perform better. So again, if we have a better discharge duration and a better spark energy, that's going to come in really handy when we're doing things like towing, hauling, or worst case scenario, and I've had this happen, I get some bad fuel at a gas station. It'll help at least get us down the road until we can get that cleaned out. So there's a lot of value to having that better spark energy and discharge duration. We are guaranteeing that before we put it in, that we're going to at least meet that OE spec. But in most cases, we're going to beat that. And that's a good case of that. Now, we can't talk about performance, fuel economy, and kits that help with that without talking about VVT kits as well. And with VVT kits, this is one where technicians, I can tell you, absolutely love because in the past, there were a lot of components, one, on back order, two, you just couldn't get, and three, were 2 or 3 days out because they weren't as commonly replaced. But now technicians have done this enough to know when I work on a timing setup for a vehicle, I'm not doing it unless I replace everything. On the case of a 5.4 V8, which is known and has such a high failure rate, I don't know very many technicians these days that will do a timing kit on this without everything in it. And so that's why you see on the right, we give them literally everything they need. All the guides, tensioners, seals, gears, chain, sprockets, solenoids, and everything else. This is a case where a kit can include, you know, 15 to 20 pounds worth of parts, but they're all needed for that technician to get the job done right the first time. Now, in some cases with VVT, it's just two simple components, right? So if we look at a Chevrolet Equinox here, or really just a GM four-cylinder engine for that matter, there's a lot of known issues with rattling noise and rough idle, and it always going to come back down to the VVT solenoids. Now, the issue is again poor lack of maintenance. These things are dependent on not only the correct weight oil passing through them, but good clean oil. You know, oil that's been replenished at the right service interval, like the car says you're supposed to have, which we know nobody does. So these fail often. And what we've done is we've come up with a lot of design improvements to not only optimize the lubrication, but give it a longer service life. And obviously, it's going to come with everything needed. If it requires new bolts, you're going to get the new bolts. And there's also, remember, an intake and an exhaust side on these VVT solenoids. So those are marked with a black or a gray connector, and we do that as well so that the technician knows exactly which one is which when they start pulling them out of the box. So when we talk about the solenoids, this is going to be the most common, VVT kit that you have a conversation with. Let's talk about some of the things we do to make sure that not only do they meet, but they far exceed the OE in not only, performance, but longevity. Well, if we look on the right, there's a couple of things we do that the OE does right. And you have to do because without it, you're going to see a very quick failure. And that is there's a lubrication groove for the faster response and keeping that armature lubricated for a longer service life, as well as an oil check valve to prevent backflow, which is going to delay the operation of the solenoid if that backflow occurs. So we're going to meet the OE on this. We're going to make sure we do exactly like the OE, where our aftermarket competitors don't do that. They need to cut costs as much as they can to get that cheap price. So you're going to find that they don't have a lubrication groove. You're going to find that they do not have an oil check valve. So we're looking at a much faster failure on this versus even the OE, and definitely versus ours. But let's look at some of the other things the aftermarket, the OE does, and then what we do. So in these solenoids, there's a lot of internal components that are very important. And on the aftermarkets, especially these cheaper, more questionable lines, the internal shaft they're making out of plastic. And that plastic shaft can prematurely wear, break, or crack. And I say it will prematurely wear, break, and crack. These things are under an immense amount of pressure and heat, right? So plastic is not a very smart way to go. Same thing with the oil screen. The plastic on the oil screen, you see them there, the black pieces of plastic with the screen in the middle. Those are prone to deteriorating, separating, and clogging the oil. Again, it goes back to pressure and heat. Plastic doesn't like that kind of thing, right? And then on the spring support on the bottom, what they do is they take a small ring and they press it onto the solenoid to hold the spring into place. Well, anything pressed can work its way out eventually, right? So, and again, pressure and heat, these rings will come loose after thousands of heat cycles, essentially meaning we have zero pressure in the solenoid. So that pressed in ring does us no favors whatsoever. Well, if we compare that to the OE, it's not that much different. Now, where the aftermarket a lot of times is using plastic, at least the OE used aluminum. However, aluminum can also deform over time and alter the timing of the valves. Aluminum is a very soft metal, so it can deform. And they're also doing plastic on the screen as far as the oil screen. So, theirs is just as susceptible to that failure and separating and clogging the oil as well. And believe it or not, that spring support is the exact same on the OE side where they press the solenoid to keep the spring in. But again, those caps, those little rings can come out very easily. So what do we do? Well, we did everything, right? We have the lubrication groove like the OE, we have the check valve, but we are going to put, and we are putting, internal shafts that are stainless steel so that you have consistent performance and durability, right? And on the oil screen, we just took the plastic out altogether. We're welding a steel oil screen on there for better lubrication, and you get that durability out of it at the exact same time. And on the spring support, we eliminated that ring or that little cap altogether and just changed the bottom of the solenoid to overmold onto the spring, making it virtually impossible for that spring to come loose. So when we talk about solutions, not only is the solution that you have both the intake and the exhaust in the box at the same time, color matching on the pigtail connector, but it has everything that it should have as far as the OE design, and it has everything that should have been done different or better, our design after the fact. And that is a great solution for customers. And remember, think about it from this perspective. If one went out, the other is probably going to go out soon after. But also look at it this way. If you only use one of ours, say for the intake, then that poor design on the exhaust still exists. So it just makes sense to put two newer designed that are longer lasting and better performing in at the same time so that we get that proper timing on the vehicle. And whether it's that 5.4 V8 F-150 truck with, 10, 15 components or two solenoids on an Equinox, or three or four or five components on a 3.5 liter VVT system for a Honda or Acura, we're going to have what's needed in the box. That's why it's a solution, right? Because on these 3.5 liter Honda and Acuras, a typical VVT solenoid replacement requires that you disassemble the intake manifold, the valve cover, and the valve train components. So while we have the VVT component, once they put it on, guess what? They need new bolts, they need new gaskets, they need new seals. Well, we don't want those folks having to call the dealer to get those little miniature items. Sometimes the bolts are the hardest things to get. Let's keep them from having to make a secondary phone call, and let's just give them everything that they need all at one time. So I'm about done with my portion here, and I'm going to pass it over to Aaron in just a second to talk about some sales support. But I just want you to remember, we started out talking about research and development, testing and performance, and on-vehicle testing. Well, we're finishing up talking about VVT kits. Let's look at that in reference to that. So on VVTs, the R&D for VVT components is going to be done in our most advanced European design center in Poland. And when we say advanced, this is cleaner than a hospital and more technical and advanced than probably anything that I've ever seen. And you've got the engineers there just doing some amazing work to ensure that what we put in the box with VVT is absolutely going to have a longer service life. But I mean, honestly, even look better than the OE, even though it's the exact same look. So then on testing and performance, again, it's not just easy, quick testing on a bench. We're doing thermal shock testing, thermal cycling, salt spray testing, vibration testing. We're even throwing dirty oil through it as well as other things just to see what happens when we do that. And remember, tested on actual vehicles here in Irving, Texas. I just recently did some VVT sprockets for a Ford where I put about 2,500 miles on that vehicle between here and Colorado in different climates, different elevations, just to make sure that that VVT sprocket worked properly under multitudes of different conditions. So again, what's in your box? A lot, a whole lot. And to wrap that up, I'm going to pass it over to Aaron Schaefer to talk about that last piece of what's in your box, which is our sales support and how we're going to go out in the field to make it easier for you to sell these parts.
Awesome. Yeah, Corey, thank you very much. I thought that was a great job. So hopefully now after seeing that, you have a little bit better of an understanding of what's included in our kit and multi-pack offering. And I just want to briefly touch on all of the materials that are available to you to help take this message to the street and spread the word to your service provider customers. So, we have a litany of printed pieces. They can all be viewed on our website under our digital resources. We're a big believer in video, technical videos, installation videos, so much that on our YouTube channel we've created specific playlists for each category, and we have a lot of categories where we have kits and multi-packs in. So this can be a good resource when you're at the service provider and need to lean on a video. And as part of our kind of ongoing way to help arm you with additional technical material than what's in a presentation such as this is we regularly update very detailed digital product portfolios. These are, sometimes as long as 30 pages. They're available on our site. When you go to the top, click on digital resources, and then you can search by a specific product category, and these will pop up. But these are really landscape books that you can read and learn more about the products, and they can easily be used when you're training colleagues or visiting customers as well. So another video that just would like to mention, earlier this month, we launched this new kit video that we filmed with Corey. And essentially what it's kind of the highlights of this 45-minute presentation in a 3-minute video. It's right in our YouTube page. It's the most recent video on the What's in Your Box training series playlist. So this is, again, another nice quick resource that you could use when you're in the field to educate your the folks you work with if they weren't able to make it today, and service provider customers who want to learn more about multi-pack coils, oil filter housings, and GDI fuel pump kits specifically. So yeah, just just to bring it home, there's obviously different benefits to kits and multi-packs. Depending on what the product category is really going to dictate what we offer. But what you'll see with many of our kits and multi-packs, especially under the Blue Streak brand, is very specific design improvements to address OE weak points. As we start to go through these training series this year and take a deeper dive into specific product categories, we're going to talk a lot more about that. Coverage is something that I think we're all very, very proud of. The lineup that we have in kits and multi-packs is strong, and we're committed to growing it. Outside of that, in the categories that we spoke about today, we certainly have very, very good to industry-leading coverage across the whole product range. And then, we just want you to feel good about recommending these brands. There is an awful lot of testing and validation that goes in behind it. A lot of this is because we're a manufacturer, so we have the ability to test in our own plants. That's something that sets us apart from a lot of the other folks. And we also recognize that a training seminar like this is good, but if there's nothing you can take away from it and take to the street, it becomes a little more difficult than it needs to sell. So we want you to feel fully supported with marketing materials that have simple, clear messaging and good, strong images, so you can quickly communicate this value to your customers. So yeah, that's what we had for you today, and we're happy to open it up. If you have any questions, feel free to type them in, and we've got a team on between myself and Corey and Stephen that can address them. All right. Well, Corey, you must have done a really good job today.
Well, you know what? No, I have a mic that can be turned off,
Oh,
and apparently I hit the button. So, no, I was going to say I looked to make sure we didn't have any questions, but I do want to let everyone know if you have questions after the call today, please don't hesitate to reach out to your local rep. If they
yeah,
don't have the answer, they can call us. If we don't have the answer, we have someone we can call. But we want to give you that support after this call. It's not just now, and it's not just when you talk to your technician. We've got your back down the road as well. So
for
please don't
sure.
hesitate to reach out if you have anything. And with that, Aaron, I'll say thank you to you. Thank you for the team that put this together. And thank you to everybody that came here today to see this call. And hopefully you're registering for those future calls on other topics so that we can get you some great resources to go out and have even more conversations and more confidence in that Standard and Blue Streak brand when you do. So with that, Aaron, I'll say thank you. Everybody have a wonderful day, and hopefully the next customer that comes in is going to ask you about an ignition coil or a VVT component or maybe an injector, and you're going to be ready to hit that multi-pack running. So have a wonderful day, everybody, and we will see you on the next one in February.
Thanks, gang.